over some common threads that we're seeing, some common concerns that are typically brought up from a lot of these C-level CEO, CIO, CXO type folks. We'll do a little case study on a law firm that we talk to in Kentucky here locally. So we'll kind of go over some things with them. And then we'll also be talking about cyber maturity, so what that means to your organization, and how we can kind of go about doing that. So my name is Joey Lee. I'm a consulting systems engineer with NetGain Technologies. I've been there for about 6 years, since 2011. I'm one of our cybersecurity experts that we have, so typically engage in risk assessments, other network security assessments, and different firewall projects, etc. I have a CISSP, and I'm also a certified ethical hacker, so a few different security certifications there. So, yeah, let's dig into some of the scary stuff. So, we have ransomware, and does anybody remember what this was? Does this look familiar to anybody? We talked about it a little bit earlier. Ransomware. It is a ransomware variant. That's exactly right. Does anybody know which one this was?
Is that Lockheed?
This was WannaCry. So this happened around June. So this kind of spread in June. And so what WannaCry did was it actually exploited a SMB vulnerability. So what that did was it allowed remote code execution through the SMB protocol, and it hit a lot of machines. And again, this happened around June of this year. So here's another one that happened about a month later. So this was Petya, very similar to WannaCry. It is a ransomware variant. It used a lot of the same technology that WannaCry did. So the irony of this is this pretty much picked up where WannaCry left off. So the people that didn't apply that SMB patch, they got hit with this. So this is a little bit different variant than WannaCry was. Now, there was another one that was released. There's another variant of ransomware that was released that was called Not Petya. Now, this guy was really different, a different approach to ransomware than we've seen in the security industry previously. So, whereas Petya was designed to be profit-based, and it was designed to exploit your money, and designed for capital gain, Not Petya was actually designed to just wipe out your data. So not only did it follow the traditional methodology of ransomware, it would, well, unfortunately someone had to let it in the network first. That's the sad part about all this is, right, you gotta willfully let it into your network. So Not Petya got into the network, and it encrypted your data, just like normal, and then you paid your money, or your Bitcoin, or whatever. Nothing happened. You waited, and nothing happened. So once a lot of the security analysts and a lot of the different labs kind of dug in and analyzed all this, they found that there was no decryption mechanism. There was no way to get your data back. So again, something different that we hadn't seen before, where there was no way to get your data back by paying the ransom, by getting their money. So very interesting variant there. So here's a good map. This is really good that shows you can tell kind of the trajectory of how everything went. Some of the larger pockets that you can see in Central and Eastern Europe kind of started there, in Eastern Asia as well, and then slowly kind of crept across the globe there to the Western Hemisphere, some larger metros in the US, and some different areas down in South America. And again, this was all caused by an SMB vulnerability on Windows machines. Now, back to some Star Wars. So let's say, so everybody remembers from Star Wars when they were trying to test the Death Star. They had Leia hostage, and they said, we're gonna try it on your planet. So they blew up the planet. What if that wasn't the case? What if they target something else? What if they tried to use a Death Star on some other planet or some other galaxy? Or what if they blew up all the rebel bases, right? There wouldn't be a Star Wars. There wouldn't be part 3, there wouldn't be a trilogy, there wouldn't be a part 8, there wouldn't be any of that. So the same can be said for us. Like, what if this actually happened to the US instead of Eastern Europe or China? What would happen if it spawned here? What would have been impacted, right? Banks, maybe? Any critical infrastructure? Maybe water reserves, power plants, power grids, things like that. So, who knows? So, very, very interesting stuff there. Now here's just some general, and this isn't exclusive to WannaCry, but this is more so targeted at ransomware in general. So, like we said, did anybody test the laser pointer yet? So that top bullet point. So that's the patch we were talking about earlier, the Microsoft the vulnerability with the SMB protocol. That was released, I think, in June. And what's funny about this, and it's very un-Microsoft-like of them, this vulnerability was such a glaring issue that they released patches for all their OSs, including XP and 2003, which is no longer on the Microsoft roadmap. So that kind of tells you how big of an issue that was. This one works, yes. Also want to make sure that we're keeping AV signatures current. Want to make sure that we're doing active scanning. Want to make sure that we're not just doing nightly scans at 8 p.m. No, we're good. We're good. Want to make sure that we have good backup solutions in place, multi-layered backup solutions and DR solutions. Not just nightly backups. That's not enough anymore. We like to see snapshots of the SAN. We like to see snapshots of your virtual machines. We like to also have some granular file level recovery abilities as well. So having a good, solid, multi-level, multi-layered backup strategy. Cyber education. So end user awareness. We've been talking about that earlier. I think Tucker was talking about that earlier as far as your end users being a huge threat to just letting these vulnerabilities and letting these different malware variants in. So educating the end users. And this doesn't have to be anything super formal. It doesn't have to be a big meeting like this is. It could just be a little blog, or it could be a news headline that maybe kind of brings to light something that you saw in the news headlines. And hey, check out this little paragraph about maybe a phishing scam, or I know around tax time, right? There was all kinds of IRS scams that were going around, right? That you owe this money. And they're like, the IRS is like, we're never going to call you and tell you to pay us money directly. We're going to send you something in the mail. It's going to take 3 months to get to you. So yeah, it can be as something as, again, the end user awareness, and that can be something as formal as a monthly training. It could be a pre-recorded video. It could just be a little email blurb, that you send out, hey, be aware of this. So the end user awareness can really go a long way in helping us fortify things from the outside, or from the inside out. So, also want to talk about conducting vulnerability scans and pen tests, web application pen tests. We're seeing a lot more, not only much more of an emphasis on clients and organizations that are subject to compliance measures, but we're also seeing a lot more vulnerability scans conducted just by normal organizations that may not be subject to regulations. So it's important to understand where we at, what our current security posture is, where we are, where our deficiencies are, so we can assess those, and we're going to see some gaps in those security measures, and then we can work through remediating that risk in the organization.
Joey.
Yes.
I do have a hopefully quick question.
Sure.
Was the WannaCry and Petya, you know, they took advantage of that vulnerability in Windows file sharing. Was it an issue with the protocol itself? Because from what I understand, even Linux implementations of SMB1 were also affected.
Yeah,
So-
it was across the board. And yes, it was SMB version 1 that was easily exploited. That is
I
correct.
just
So,
wanted to hear if it was just Microsoft, because I'd heard that Linux implementations of it were also affected. So I thought, well, there must have been something in the protocol itself.
Yes, that is correct. It was the issue in the SMB stack there that caused that remote code execution vulnerability. It is, like you said, it is applicable across multiple platforms. Similar to kind of what some of the Heartbleed was and all that SSL was. The OpenSSL implementations were kind of vendor agnostic or OS agnostic, you know. But yes, it was. I was kind of speaking specifically to Microsoft.
Right,
But you're
no,
exactly
that's
right.
fine. I know that some people have, you know, NAS devices that they may not even realize that, you know, it's running Linux.
Right.
But they don't
Right.
have to just plug it in and
Or
it works.
VMware host or anything like
Right.
that. And I'm typically not. I'm not really a Linux guy. The most Linux stuff I touch is to the VMware thing. So I generally I speak to the Microsoft side. But you're exactly right. It was a flaw in the protocol that was across different OS platforms.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions so far? Good. So here's some news. Here's some headlines that we saw last year. This top one's very interesting. This was a police department, so even they can't get cybersecurity right, apparently. That's kind of intriguing. So this police department was located in the Dallas metro area, and they contracted some ransomware, and they engaged the FBI's cyber division to kind of pick their brain and get advice from them. Well, the FBI standpoint, as is ours and typically across the board, don't pay the ransom. Don't do it. Use your backups if you have to, right?
I've heard different. I mean, that's new. I mean, I heard that the FBI, and this is when you could feel comfortable about them giving your data back. So now that information has changed, they won't tell you publicly to pay, but they have said, hey, I mean, remember we had that conversation once before, so.
Yeah, most people are going to wind up paying. Of course, most government agencies are going to tell you not to pay.
Right.
Because the only way to truly stop this is for everybody to stop paying the ransom.
Right.
But I guarantee you, my firm's going to pay the ransom.
Right.
For $700, even a couple of hours of lost productivity, and my firm is way more than $700.
Right. And that's a very good point. You know, there's definitely a case that can be made for both sides. Luckily, we're going to go over a couple different instances, the different scenarios where people paid, people didn't pay, people, you know, so we'll kind of cover some of that too. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, and typically we don't recommend paying the ransom. That's why we have good backups, right? That's what you pay good money for your backups for, your backup solution, your DR solution. But thank you for that. So with Cockrell Hill, they did not pay the ransom. The FBI recommended to not pay the ransom. They ended up having to wipe all their systems because the backups weren't sufficient that they had, unfortunately. So some of the data that they lost, luckily they only lost 8 years of data. So that's good, right? So that included Microsoft documents, that included forensics evidence for cases, that included surveillance footage, that included body cam footage for police officers, all kinds of things. So 8 years of data was lost in this particular instance. So again, did not pay the ransom, wiped all their systems, and pretty much started from 2009.
So was that the department where it took the 911 system down too?
I don't remember.
There was one like that where they.
It very well could have been. It very well could have been. Well, if they implemented it in the past 8 years, it probably.
Right.
So there were also quite a few hospitals that were hit last year as well, and same for this year. I think last year there were about 20-something hospitals across the globe that were in the U.S. that is, so domestically, that were impacted by ransomware in one way, shape, or form. I know Tucker earlier mentioned one about a medical facility in California. This was the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. So it made headlines because they paid the ransom, and it was actually one of the larger documented ransomware payments. And so that was they paid 17 grand to get all their data back. Typically, you know, I know there's some screenshots and we'll see some stuff. Typically, you know, you may see $1,000, $1,500, $5 grand, but it was surprising to see that they paid 17 grand. I mean, I guess it is Hollywood. I guess it makes sense, right? Lots of money floating around there, but again, they ended up paying the ransom, 17 grand, and it took almost 2 weeks to get fully operational again. So it took about 10 days to get everything back up and running and resume all their business services there and all the patient care.
Hey, Joey.
Yes.
Have you noticed, is the average cost or what the ransom asking price is that going up, going down, or is it kind of staying?
So although Bitcoin is crazy expensive now, I've seen that the cost has been pretty static. Pretty static as far as, you know, it may maybe 1,500 here, maybe $5 grand here. Although Bitcoin is on the incline and increasing in price like crazy, the ransoms are still typically pretty steady. Any other questions about some of these? Yeah, the police department thing's crazy. It just blows my mind. The 8 years. So here's some more numbers. Everybody's heard of ransomware. It still makes news headlines. It still makes the nightly news. It's in the newspaper. It's everywhere. And so there's been an alarming increase in ransomware campaigns since 2015. I think it's like a 15x increase. So that's what, like 1,500%. So pretty crazy stuff. Like I was saying, Bitcoin is crazy expensive. A lot of the cybercrime is funneling through Bitcoin. A lot of money laundering, all that nefarious stuff. Bitcoin, I think I checked it earlier today. It's about $4,500, whereas a year ago it was $500. So far this year, there's been over $1 billion exploited worldwide. So cybercrime is responsible for over $1 billion in damages so far this year. So we still have another quarter to go. So that number is only going to go up. And a lot of security experts and a lot of analysts are projecting that by the end of 2019, it's going to double. So we'll almost be at $2 billion in cybercrime by the end of 2019. So let's get into some more defenses that we can deploy, some more different layering approaches to protecting our environment against ransomware. Again, the Microsoft patch and patching SMB version 1, moving to one of the later SMB protocols. May not want to have SMB public facing either. May not want to be sending things in and out, so in that capacity, so you can control that a bit better. Backups. I'm probably going to beat the backups like a dead horse today. It's very, very important, especially if we don't plan on paying the ransomware. It's very important to leverage your backup systems. It's paramount to test the backups. right? You're only as good. Are there any people still using tape? Anybody still using tape for backup? It's okay. I'm just curious. Don't want to single anybody out. So it's important to not only have a good, solid backup solution, a layered backup solution, but testing and validating the integrity of that data. I've been through those exercises, and those are not fun to realize. Yes, sir.
Question about asking if anybody has tape backup. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So different backup solutions. Obviously, we've got tape backup solutions, disk-based backup solutions. We have different backup solutions that can leverage virtualized technologies and virtualization technologies that may utilize snapshots of a particular running configuration at a particular point in time. So whereas we don't, I know in the physical world we were typically used to doing bare metal restores. You know, you would have that ability, and hey, you could restore this point, it's going to be a clean OS, and you just layer your apps on top of there. Well, on the virtualization side of things, you can leverage the snapshot technologies, particularly in the VMware world, and you can take a snapshot. It's kind of like a DVR, where you can take a snapshot of that exact point in time, where the mouse is on the screen, how the registry settings were set up, what applications were running. So again, very, a lot of different backup solutions out there. Traditionally, tape backups are, and they've been around the block for a while, they're an older technology, typically long-term, very expensive to maintain, keeping tapes, rotating tapes, taking tapes to the bank vault, taking new tapes, a lot of manual intervention there too. So we like to see a lot of the newer virtualization backup solutions that can really leverage a lot of those snapshots and how everything runs. Does that help out a little bit?
I'm just kind of curious how it related tape backups to the ransomware.
Sure. So typically, well, not typically. Sometimes you run into issues with restoring tapes. It can be a very lengthy process. So that then increases the amount of time it takes to restore those backups. It may or may not increase the volatility of the backup, so the ability to retrieve good data. Because I know I've ran into issues working with tape backup systems where it's backing up completely, it backs up successfully, and you get a message say it's good to go, and then you go and pull out the tape and look at it. Everything's good, physically inspect it. You put it in and try to restore, and it fails. You just can't pull data off of it. So kind of a crapshoot sometimes with the tapes. But again, it is what it is. We also want to make sure that we're closely monitoring and managing privileged accounts, right? So if we have user accounts, not everybody's getting root access. Not everybody's getting domain admin access. Need to make sure that we're closely monitoring these admin accounts and these privileged accounts. So with great privilege comes great responsibility as well on the network as far as not getting into the things that we don't need to be rooting around in. So keeping a close watch on those privileged accounts is very important. I'm kind of going to some old school role-based privilege methodology and principles. I'd like to see the principle of least privilege employed as well. So the principle of least privilege means that we're going to give users privileges based on the roles that they perform. So we're going to give them the minimum necessary privileges to pull off their day-to-day work. We're not going to give someone that's just in data processing, we're not going to give them access to all of the Active Directory schema, or all of the infrastructure. So we're going to make sure that people have just the right amount of privileges to get the work done that they need to, and kind of keep them out of critical places and sensitive places that they may not need to. So moving on to some infrastructure items. Want to make sure that we're hardening our network devices, we're securing our network devices. Like Tucker had mentioned earlier, firmware, we want to make sure we're updating firmware on the devices. We talked a minute ago about some of the SSL, some of the open SSL vulnerabilities, again, maybe 2-3 years ago. but that was in the OpenSSL suite, and OpenSSL was used in a variety of hardware and software applications. So also want to make sure that we're doing out-of-band management of networks, so making sure that it's a management network's defined and we're sending management traffic over here. So if you were to get access to the management network, or if you know, we're going to segment all that off. We also have defense in depth, another kind of old school terminology. I've heard some whisperings. I've read some papers too recently where they'll say defense in depth is dead. It's dead. I disagree. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that a layered approach is one of the best approaches you can take to not only securing the infrastructure, but it applies to policy too. You know, so you have a lot of different overlapping policies as well. So again, I think defense in depth is still alive and well. So now we have some more threats. Again, we're talking. I know Robert's been talking with a lot of CEOs lately. Scott, one of our other cybersecurity experts, and myself, we've been working in the boardroom a lot lately with a lot of CEOs, CIOs, CSOs, the entire C-suite, trying to understand, you know, what's the old question? What keeps you? You know, that old question. So we're hearing a lot of the same concerns throughout these different conversations. So inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. So we should know which, we need to have an inventory of these devices. It's got to be accurate, right? We've got to know what's going on, who has which devices. We should also know this device is probably going to access this network, and this is typical behavior between the hours of 9 a to 5 p. We also know that this device here, this iPhone, this iPad, maybe this should never be on this network. So again, trying to understand baselines, what anomalies may look like as far as unauthorized devices that are on sensitive networks or in sensitive areas. Again, back to control and admin privileges, need to make sure that not everybody has keys to the castle. I know I've seen before where you'll go do an AD audit and there's some vendor account that was created 3 years ago and it's like, holy crap, this has access to everything. And it may have been disabled at one point in time or it got re-enabled. So kind of taking a good inventory of who has access to these different admin privileges. Boundary defense. So I know we've had a few different cloud discussions today. So as we become more and more reliant on the cloud and as we push more data to the cloud, that then extends our boundaries and we need to be more cognizant of those ingress and egress traffic points, and we need to protect those and fortify those areas there. Again, back to the backups. Must have efficient, reliable data recovery capabilities that really help fortify the infrastructure there. Vulnerability assessments and remediation and pen tests. Again, wanted to kind of talk about that. Not only as a tool to help and help with compliance measures, but also understanding your security posture. Do we have services that may not need to be running anymore? Are they still running? Or, hey, I thought we had removed that from the firewall, but it's still in place. Okay? So continual vulnerability assessment. Quarterly, annually, every couple of months, every month. So obviously if you have compliance regulations, sometimes we just see the check the box, see you next year vulnerability assessment type deal. Sometimes we do see clients that are really driving the risk management process and really doing constant vulnerability assessment. And then once they remediate, right back to the beginning. Wash, rinse, repeat, and just continue to really drive that. This is always a terrible vlogs. Oh my gosh. So not only are there millions and millions of logs that are just flying through every hour, these often get purged quicker. So Tucker had a really good slide earlier about the average breach or the average breach detection is about 100 days, so a little bit over 3 months. So by the time you have detected that, the logs that showed that penetration or that vulnerability that was exploited, that's long gone. We don't have that information anymore. So anybody have any SIEM solutions out there, any SIM solutions that do log management or log monitoring? Any SolarWinds or Splunk or Event Tracker or anything like that? Anybody have any SIM solutions? Pat?
No, sir.
I'm just kidding. No, so again, the logs are, there's so many logs, it's hard to really to extract the important data that we need. So SIM solutions and different log management solutions can help us analyze that and monitor those logs in a timely and efficient fashion.
Joey,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned breach and the significance of that and reporting those. There's lots of new laws out there now regarding the timeliness of proper reporting, which are defined by every single state. So there's different laws for Kentucky and Indiana. There's cross-border business being done, and it also applies to where data resides in data centers, and that's involved with proper breach reporting if it is a reportable breach.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point that timely reporting. It's like, well, we had a breach in 2015. Sorry, just got around to it. Sorry, it doesn't really work that way. That's no longer, the willful ignorance is no longer an excuse.
And they're implementing the fines, I'm sorry, but they're implementing the fines that are involved with lack of reporting as well now too.
I
It's
think
rolled out earlier this year.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of SIM deployments and requirements in the financial sector, so a lot of banks. So we're seeing a lot of maybe regional banks, smaller credit unions kind of jumping on board and getting in with these SIM solutions. I think there was a push, was it like a year or so ago, for auto dealers? I think they had started implementing some of that too across the board. I think General Motors had put out a mandate or something along those lines, I believe. So yeah, very, very interesting stuff there. Document management, we were talking about document management earlier. This is the bullet point right here. Data classification and protection, understanding where sensitive data types reside. Understanding what data lives where. I know every organization has a file server, and I'm sure at some point in time, maybe it still does, but at some point in time, it's had everything on it, right? So it's got spreadsheets, it's got timesheets, it's got social security numbers, it's got your kids' T-ball pictures, it's got everything, right? So it's very important to not only classify where these sensitive data types live, but we need to, once we analyze those things, we need to then take proactive measures to protect those data locations. And like you said, the document management program will help that tremendously. Not only identify sensitive data types like socials, phone numbers, if there's serial numbers or patient IDs, things like that, where you can key in on a specific data field that fits a certain pattern, you can classify and then protect that data. IoT, Internet of Things, that's nothing new. So again, I guess about 5 years ago, there was the big BYOD push, bring your own device. So the concept behind that was, you give me anything that can get an internet connection and we'll put it on the network. And it's fantastic. And then you gotta secure these devices, and that was a nightmare. So the same thing can be said right now with a lot of IoT devices. We're seeing a lot of companies and a lot of organizations behind the 8 ball trying to catch up. They've brought all this new tech in, and they're like, okay, well, how do we safeguard against this stuff? How do we protect these things? So very, very fast. A lot of companies are pretty quickly adopting some IoT things, and so it's important to not leave that behind it and not kind of brush that under the rug. Anybody doing any cool IoT stuff with their organizations, any manufacturers, anything like that? There's also some studies out there and some good info. The security skill, the gaps in security skill sets and cybersecurity skill sets are widening as far as what your traditional IT personnel is capable of doing and what these threat actors are doing out in the dark web or on different networks or in different parts of the globe. So we're seeing a gap in the skill sets that we need to protect our organization, protect our environment. So seeing a lot of that, unfortunately. Again, back to the secure configurations of firewalls, routers, switches. Incident response and management. Are there any like policy drafters here? Anybody here write policy? Okay, cool. Do you guys have an incident response plan?
We use from the corporate level when it comes down, and we have to adapt it to our site.
Okay, cool. Was that was a pretty easy endeavor, right?
Yeah, I mean,
No,
there's-
just-
for my side, it was easy, because we had the template, and
Right, right.
basically we said, okay, these things apply to our site, so we're implementing these here. Yeah, I feel for whoever had to write the overall policy for corporate, sincerely, most of our site-based policies are specific to our systems.
So yeah, having an incident response plan, you know, like we talked about, timely breach and incident reporting. Do we have a plan in place? What happens? Who's in charge of that? Who do we report to? Do we verify they got, you know, the information that we sent them, and we're following up in a timely manner? Also, web app security. We're seeing a lot, well, not a lot, but an extraordinary amount of e-commerce. You know, we're seeing a ton of e-commerce, a lot of front-end apps that are developed in-house. And sometimes you get these security measures sometimes get pushed to the wayside at the expense of convenience. And that's like the old sliding rule, you know, so security goes up, ease of use and flexibility drastically goes down. So again, making sure that we're securing our web apps, no SQL injections, no SQL injections, no buffer overflows, good stuff like that on the app side. So here's our case study. It's nothing too flashy. Just we had an organization. It was a decent sized law firm in Kentucky. Maybe it was about 120, 100 seats, something like that. And they called us up and they said we got hit with ransomware. So we kind of had the same discussion that went through kind of some of the same steps, addressed some of the same questions that I've been kind of going over today. And so we said, what about your backups? How about your backups? Well, we don't know. Kind of shaky. So, okay, the ransom is X. Are you comfortable paying that? They said, yeah, well, let's go for it. Let's do it. So they paid the ransom. And did they get their data back, or did they not get their data back? Show of hands. Do you think they got their data back? You got one? How many people think they didn't get their data back? That's right. So this was a really outside looking in. This was a very cool scenario because out of all the security conferences I've been to, out of all the papers that I've read, all this and that, I've never seen one instance of this aside from this particular instance. What had happened was they had contracted ransomware, and somebody clicked on it, and so it encrypted everything. And then somebody clicked on the same attachment, and it re-encrypted it. So the ransom they paid was for that first encryption, and it wasn't the proper key to get their data back. So very, very interesting. A little bit different outcome than we talked about earlier, where the hospital in Hollywood paid the ransom and they got their data back and everything was happy and everybody was chummy. But yeah, so luckily or unlikely outcome. Look at it. This law firm lost almost a year of data. So 8 months. 8 months of data. Not the 8 years we were talking about like the police department from earlier, but needless to say, almost a year of data. So obviously there's a bit of hard costs to that too, but what about the soft costs, right? So there's only, there's only so many law firms, and that community is a pretty tight-knit group, And so maybe their brand was tarnished a little bit. Maybe they lost clients at the expense of this. So a lot of different hard and soft costs associated with this. So kind of some takeaways from this, like we were saying, we're having a big issue controlling end users. And they are the biggest threat because they politely let the bad guys in. So again, we're seeing a large gap, and the gap is widening in the skill set between these threat actors that we see or we hear about and the actual staff that we have at our organizations and at our companies. So this can cause increased IT spending. So it's blowing IT budget out of the water. We're seeing increased malware attacks. We're seeing a lot of phishing attacks. That's where all this stuff is coming in. It's coming in through email. And it's typically, there's the bad ones that say it's from FedEx, and it's like, that's something I don't need. But we're seeing a lot of spoofed email coming from internally, from real mail addresses. We had one instance where there was a scanner account in Active Directory, weak password, and it was just used as an account for an SMTP relay for scanned email. Cool. Well, again, really weak password. The terminal server got brute forced. The password was guessed, and then it started spoofing emails. Right? So you just get that reply email from that scan, and here's your document that you scan that blueprint here. That was actually ransomware. So this particular organization got infected that way. I know last year there was denial of service. There was really, I think there were 2 major events that were really kind of alarming to the magnitude that we haven't seen before. There's been some minor DOS stuff, but I know up in New England there was just a complete regional shutdown. So seeing a lot of denial of service attacks. There are things out there. There are security solutions out there. For instance, Cisco and their OpenDNS, their umbrella solution, kind of does some DNS reputation filtering that kind of can help prevent those denial of service attacks, and can also swing DNS out to their DNS providers, and kind of steer you clear of those DDoS attacks. So, cyber maturity. What is cyber maturity? No, it is not going to 18 and over sites. That is not cyber maturity. But we want to make sure that we're evaluating all of our risks. Like we were saying, we're really trying to own and really trying to drive this risk management process and understanding where our deficiencies are. We're going to be evaluating the risk. We're going to understand, hey, here's this issue that we have. Let's say we have a $100,000 solution we're going to put in place. But that risk may only be a $50,000 risk. So at that point, maybe we assume that risk and maybe we're okay with that. Let's say we pay for some insurance, and let's say we transfer that risk to a third-party vendor. So different ways of dealing with the risk and evaluating the risk. Now, once we have a good grasp on what risk and what threats we do have to the organization, there's going to be some gaps that are going to become pretty apparent. We're going to understand where those deficiencies are, and then we can remediate those items. Again, like we were saying, is the remediation effort is it more costly than the risk that's involved in just inheriting that issue? Or again, are we gonna tackle some low-hanging fruit pretty quickly, take care of that, knock those out, and then move on to the bigger items? And so at the end of the day, this is gonna help drive next steps and kind of moving out of the IT shop and kind of moving throughout the organization. This is also gonna help ensure growth. It's gonna help the IT department possibly procure budget, or it's gonna help with budgetary planning. Those are always fun conversations to have, aren't they? Hey, we need more money. I need more money. And it can also help with business development of the organization as well. And so once we're really owning and driving this risk management process, you'll get to a level of maturity where it's no longer, I don't want to say it's not a task, it's always a good task, but it's a little bit more palatable. It's a little bit easier to run through. You know, we did this last year, no sweat, we got this time. So again, attaining a level of operational and IT maturity and cyber maturity in your organization. And so, just like Yoda said, do or do not. There is no try, right? So again, it's back to that you against the world. You're the last IT manager. So it's you against all these bad guys, you and your team. So again, making sure that we're putting a layered approach in place, making sure that we're driving the risk management and vulnerability management process, making sure that we're going through due diligence, making sure we're hitting our milestones for compliance. And that is it. That is it for me. Any questions? Anybody have any questions?
One of the things I've seen kind of lately would be a lot of these ransomware and cryptos, they seem to be going after backups as well. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, we've seen that too. I'm gonna grab something from my bag. We've seen that too, where it just kind of runs amok. The ransomware does. And if sometimes we can defeat these ransomware attempts by having offline backup storage. So we've seen that. But yeah, what the ransomware does is it really takes and exploits an account and it traverses the file structure. So it traverses those directories. So what if you have access, kind of like we were talking about different privileges, right? So if I'm just Bob, sorry to pick on Bob, it seems like he's the best name to use today. But if I'm Bob and if I've got all the keys to the castle and I get ransomware, whatever directories I have access to, it's going to run amok right up that file tree and encrypt all that data. And if you do have permissions to those backup sets, like if it's just on a map drive somewhere, there's a good chance it's going to encrypt those too. So off-site backups, offline backup sets as well, that's going to help prevent and help mitigate the risk against, again, your backup sets getting tainted by ransomware. Very good question. What else? Any other questions? Anyone, does anyone have a CIO? Anyone have a CSO, a dedicated CIO, CSO in your department? Do they have a CTO, or does it just roll up to the director of IT? Anybody want to speak on that real quick as far as how their company structure goes? Yes, sir.
For state government, each cabinet has a cabinet CIO that's responsible for the business of the cabinet. And not organizationally, but for IT, we also have a technology advisory council that's by executive order of the governor. So we all meet on that council and kind of support up, but in a partnership with the state CIO for state government. And we also have a CISO.
Are you in Kentucky or Indiana?
Kentucky.
Oh, Kentucky. Great. Thank you for participating. Who, anybody else want to talk about their organization, their CSO structure? Anybody else just want to talk and get a free?
Best thing I've got at a conference.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
So I work for a pharmaceutical company. We're actually a very small part of a very large multinational company. So we're in the healthcare division of that company. So each of the 7 divisions has their own like CIO, and then under that is each little branch. So like our branch, we just have the manager level, it's me, and I report for finance at that branch. One of the larger branches has their own like director of IT. Because ours is small, we don't have that director. So we kind of branch depending on the further you go down the organization.
Do you see, how does that communication work? Is it sometimes pretty?
Yeah, it gets kind of grainy, especially, like at the site level, it's kind of a, 1 or 2 man shop, you do it all. And then when you go up to corporate, there's, very focused divisions. So you get these people where if you ask them a question that might apply to multiple divisions, they just don't know. So you have to, multiple people and the right people, and sometimes finding the right person is difficult. So a lot of the times you end up going to the top, and they work their way down to find the level you actually need. Working from the bottom up could take months to get an answer.
Sure. Any other questions? How about vulnerability management? Does anybody have a pretty solid, pretty well vetted, mature vulnerability management system? Anybody in IT out here want to speak on that?
You mean like WSUS or something like that, or?
Well, more so, yes, some patch management, yeah, we can roll that up into that vulnerability and that risk management process. More so assessing the vulnerability and scanning and the deep dives into the network and the kind of the gap assessments and a lot of that analysis. Anybody familiar with that process or working to achieve that kind of level of risk management or vulnerability?
Joey, I'll just add to that. So I'm seeing clients who are moving more from a once-a-year type of security audit posture to looking at, hey, if we're really going to make an impact in our business, we've got to change the culture. This is an ongoing conversation. We've got to get our users thinking about security and thinking about how their decisions and their actions impact the security of the organization. And so instead of a once-a-year, hey, the security auditor's here and we're going to blast out the social engineering email, word quickly spreads throughout the organization, hey, don't click that link, you're going to get fired type of thing, It's more of a random, a white hat type of approach to testing the network and making sure that, an ongoing testing and random sampling of how we're doing versus a once a year type of event.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Now, we also see, this is my spiel every time I deliver. It's kind of cheesy, but this is my spiel every time I deliver a risk assessment. I go, all right, here's the deal. We have this report. Here it is. So we have your report. We have your results. You guys can handle it on your own. We can play ball together. Or this thing's going to gather dust and we're going to come and see you next year and just check the box again. So like Robert was saying, whereas there are some organizations that are solely dedicated to compliance and that's it. There is a misconception that compliance doesn't necessarily equate to operational security. So the compliance are some guidelines, some best practices that they've rolled out and they've vetted to make sure that makes sense for that particular vertical or that particular industry. But being compliant doesn't necessarily equate to having a secure organization and having your network locked down. So like Robert was saying, it is a cultural shift at times, trying to explain to the end users the importance of things. And the phishing emails, we do some phishing email campaigns occasionally, depending on the need of the client. And you all would be blown away at the stuff we see. It could be, some of them the campaigns that we do are crafted, and they're pretty slick. It looks, maybe instead of IT at NetGainIT.com, it's IT department. Like maybe we made a different distribution group. So just a subtle change. Again, some of those are kind of slick. We've even seen some where, hey, big old picture of a steak in the email, big T-bone. First person to send me their password gets a free T-bone. And the inbox just blows up. I'm not joking, not joking. And then we've seen, I saw a 60% hit rate at a law firm. So they bit on 60% of the phishing emails that we sent. Now, I think it was, now granted it was only 20 emails, but it was 60% of those people gladly sent us their passwords and their accounts. So yeah, it's very telling. Those are the fun ones. Those are the real fun ones to do where you're like, holy crap. And it's funny too because people are kind of like, yo, don't click on that, you're gonna get fired. And we're like, no, we're trying to figure this out. We're trying, like I said, making that cultural shift to help them understand the implications of what could happen. So, awesome. Thank you guys and gals.